Thanks, Len. So the title here is A Repository in a Week. How many think that can be done? Can you build a repository in a week? Good. So let's get some dialogue going about that, because I think what we need to do is help convince the other half of the room that doesn't think it can be done. We'll talk about that as we go through it. As Len mentioned, I'm with the VCU School of Business in Richmond, Virginia. You do not want us to do your logos for you. In 13 years with the department, that's the best we've been able to come up with in terms of logos. Not all professors are creative in graphics and things like that. A bunch of books and all the usual stuff there. I worked for the Department of Defense for a while, and an interesting side note of what I do for the university is that in 1999, they spun off a separate for-profit company out of the university that is called Data Blueprint, and this is our customer list to date in terms of things. It means I get to do a bunch of different things, which is I get to work with people and teach them how to be data architects and data engineers. I also get to go out and work with clients and customers and colleagues. Len and I have worked on projects together, and this is one that Glenn and I are going to present together on this. And then also I work as VP of Communications for DAMA International. And again, remember, survey.datablueprint.com. Go out and fill out your surveys so we can learn more about what we do as a profession, all along the lines there. Glenn here has a similar type of background on this. We met at a conference February last year.
That right?
And kind of clicked on some things, and he said, okay, well, I've got some areas in my organization that could probably benefit from the type of thing that we're doing. So we put together a project, and that's what we're going to tell you about.
Again, my name is Glenn Carney. Currently, I'm the Director of Business Intelligence at Community America Credit Union. To put that in perspective, y'all probably know what a credit union is. Community America used to be the Trans World Airlines, TWA, Yellow Freight, Santa Fe Railroad, amongst other types of credit unions. So we're a fairly large credit union in the Midwest. And like a lot of credit unions, we're competing more and more head-to-head with banks. So our data needs are very similar to most financial institutions. As far as myself, I've been in the industry since something like the mid-'80s. Can't remember the year exactly. And I guess to describe myself, Peter said, put a slide together that describes you. Well, you know, I like to learn, and I like to do things. I'm a fairly hands-on manager. And I've been an entrepreneur. I started my own consulting company several years ago, and as Len said, I've worked for several of major corporations in Kansas City. Maybe just a little bit more background to put it in perspective for me as we'll talk about the project. I started my career as a developer, like a lot of people, and then sort of fell accidentally into various other disciplines and ended up in data management. So I've got a fairly broad background in most aspects of FIS.
So what are we going to talk about today? Well, again, what we've seen over the years is that there's sort of a traditional approach to metadata. And we'll talk about what that traditional approach is, and then we'll talk about enhancing that traditional approach with a little bit of an add-on process that the main goal is to help you all as customers of metadata type repository products to become more informed with respect to what you're going to be purchasing. So we don't recommend that you change your process, but look at supplementing it in this case. And we actually propose these things, as you know, about 4 months in advance of the conference, maybe 6 months in advance of the conference. We did this one for Glenn in November.
That's right.
Week before Thanksgiving?
I believe so.
Okay. And it turned out so well, we got much further than we expected to. We started talking about it. I said, well, I shouldn't go tell them what we did for you. You should tell them what we did together. And so that's how we got here. So this is the most recent example of this productized service that we offer at Data Blueprint, the repository in a week. Now, as I go through the process here of meeting with organizations, we find all sorts of interesting things. And one of the artifacts we found lying around in an organization, this is a European company, was one of these in everybody's cubicle. And we started looking at it, and David Raffner, were you on that trip with me? Okay. So we're kind of looking at this, and we eventually pulled out a digital camera and started taking pictures of it. And the security people came over to us and said, why are you taking pictures of these things inside of our corporate environment? And we said, well, we want to know what it is. And they said, oh, well, that's easy. It's our trash can. And then they pulled out, and this is, I kid you not, this is the one-page summary of the 50-page manual. 50 pages on how to properly sort and manage your garbage so that you appropriately put the right things in the right bins. Now, can anybody see where I'm going with this? As we did our assessment of their data management practices, one of the points that we made to their CIO was that they had better documentation on how to manage their garbage than they did in how to manage their data. Notice I'm keeping the company name out of the slides there. The other thing, though, that motivates us on this is that there are some huge project failure statistics. 50% of all data warehouses fail. So Diana, if you're going to do a data warehouse, heads or tails? You're going to fail or you're going to? Heads. She failed, right? She's got as good odds. It's a little scary, isn't it? There's other failure statistics as well, and we've seen them. And the one that's of most concern to me as a frequent traveler is that here we are 5.5 years after 9/11, and the government has yet to have a plan to integrate the 12 lists of bad people belonging to 8 agencies that we want to keep out of this country. We're real good, though, at one thing. Anybody know Cat Stevens? We keep him out of the country. Anybody know the synonym problem associated with that? Okay, so there's a senator from Alaska named Ted Stevens. Guess what his wife's name is?
Uh-oh.
Cat. She gets stopped at the airport and strip searched every time she flies. And Senator Ted Stevens is working on trying to get that little piece in place. Large IT project failures, 70%. Okay, so we're even better at flipping a coin than we are at least at trying to do large IT projects. And the reason for this is poor metadata management. So I'm assuming that many of you are in here because you're interested in understanding that there's got to be some sort of repository in the process of managing your data, that you understand that management of metadata is really key to your understanding of organizational data, and perhaps you're thinking about getting ready to move into the phase where you might study metadata repository products. Anybody in that place? We're looking at it. We might get there. Good. Okay, well, that's what we're headed for on this. And lots of organizations are in the same position. Now, you watched probably Len's presentation before for Einstein. A really significant quote he had was, the significant problems we face cannot be solved at the same level of thinking we were at when we created them. We made a mess, and now we have to unmake the mess. We need to definitely rise up above what we're looking at as we go through that. The traditional approach for most organizations has been that you study the problem. For example, somebody in IT might say the year 2007 will be our year of metadata understanding. Okay? We're going to study our metadata needs for our organization as we go through, and at the end of a year of study, we'll be really smarter, and then we'll go talk to the vendors. Okay? Well, again, you probably develop a formalized set of requirements, perhaps a very thick notebook full of them, all this sort of thing, 3-ring binders. You perform some research, then at that point you talk to Giga, Gartner, IDC, whatever in terms of them, and you then engage in a dialogue with the vendors and say, okay, let's start talking about how your product will match our requirements. That's the way we teach them how to do it in school, by the way.
Can I add a comment?
Absolutely.
On that last slide, you back up one. If you're in a small organization, like I'm in right now, we're a 300-person company. I've been talking to folks this week who are in 300-person data management groups, okay? You typically just skip to step 3. And I didn't want to do that. Let's proceed.
This is an old quote, 1999, but you'll notice the key word up there is esoteric. This is an IBM report in 1999, and the key again is most executives and IS managers view an IT metadata repository as an esoteric technology that is not directly related to the business. We know that's wrong, but how do we convince them of that? That's a different issue. That's selling your repository. But let's talk about it for just a little bit. And you've heard a lot of people here talk about we really don't have a good definition of metadata. A lot of people say data about data. ISO 11779. Old version says information and documentation which makes data sets understandable and shareable to users. The new one says...
Oh, I don't know that it says anything different.
Oh, I thought they did a new one that was coming out.
I don't,
Wrong committee. Okay.
I would not consult them for a definition. I know.
Judith used to work at the National Institute of Standards and Technologies and can talk from first.
What the new definition
Do you know what the new definition is, Judith? It was under revision. I don't know whether that means they finished changing it, they decided not to change it, or they're still in the process of thinking about it. Yes.
Is that a segue to timeliness?
Hmm?
Is that a segue to timeliness?
Timeliness.
Why can't the definition of metadata be that, which is one or more levels of abstraction removed from your reality?
I actually like that a lot. And we'll go into my definition here in a little bit. We've tried some other things like data resource data. Again, some CIOs glaze over completely when you get that kind of an approach, and others, understand it. Point is to try and find something that really makes sense. Glenn had to sell this to his boss. His boss is a guy named Guy Russo. And Guy's a pretty fair IT guy. I mean, he understands a lot of good background and things like that. Actually, I think that metadata really isn't. It's all just data. But it's certainly not a noun. As Mike was saying, it's really about jumping levels of abstraction. So it's really more of the use of data in a different context. Anytime you're taking data from one level of abstraction and moving it to another, it's automatically metadata. And in that context, I think it's really more a use of data rather than a type of data. That's still not necessarily going to help us. And the other problem that we have, and I say that in particular because Guy Russo does not think that metadata is this.
That's correct.
We're just going to start at the top and catalog our way on through things. Now, one of the titles I held at the Defense Department was the U.S. DoD Reverse Engineering Program Manager. And everybody thought I walked around backwards all the time because Michael Jackson was very popular at that point in time. We had at that point in time 5 metadata repositories: a process repository, a data repository, a software repository, and an object repository, and a 5th repository that was classified over my classification. I never did find out what was in it. Notice the word separate, which means also, of course, unintegrated. And a lot of people's perception about data people is you just go around and label everything and it'll be all fine. On the other hand, we've had some help from some really good, smart minds. Anybody remember AD Cycle? What was AD Cycle? This is IBM's vision of how integrated metadata would look. They built this product out. This is, notice, not even a data model. It's a what? They crossed it. Well, remember, that's okay according to Daniel, though. You were in that session, Don. They crossed their lines. This was the ultimate. If you could put all this together, everything else you could generate, right? Now, what should your natural, and by the way, this is, what year was AD Cycle? It was late 80s, wasn't it?
I think so.
87, early 90s, okay. What should your general reaction be to this?
Too simple.
Too simple. You should laugh, right?
You're a consultant, it's going to cost $1 million to implement.
Yeah, hey, consulting-wise, this thing crashed and burned before it ever got off the ground. And this was good thinking. By the way, the logic behind here and the work that's done is actually quite good. But if you come to management and say, let me do this for you, what are they going to say? Yeah, No, we got other things that we need to get done in the process. So unfortunately, we haven't actually helped ourselves in getting through all this. Again, Glenn says he skips directly to let's go talk to the vendors. You might, talk to Gartner at some point and look at, one of their magic quadrant diagrams which shows where everything is. And we've worked with a lot of these repositories out there. And they are not bad products, but many of them tend to be a little bit old, and we'll talk about that. In fact, again, the survey that I'm really requesting that you guys all fill out, this is how we get results like this. So of repository technologies in use, according to the last version of this that we did, about 45% of you guys don't use them at all. And the next biggest category on here is the homegrown version. And then we start to get into the others in here. Notice the CA and Rochade, which are the 2 most popular, are not huge market leaders relative to where everything is. There are a whole host of really cool new products that are coming online. And again, one of the things that we do is write reports, as is Stu in here? Stu Carty also does this as well, keeps track of these things so that you can look at these reports and compare the products back and forth without Gartner, because Gartner only does it if you pay them to do it. So you got a little step curve function there. It's going to be a little bit of a problem. The general comments on repository are that they've been passive. They kind of are focused on relational and warehouse kind of things. How many of you have significant non-relational data processing in your organizations? Okay. Yeah, About a third of you guys are doing this. And try to take that away and replace it with relational, which is, of course, what we tell you that you should do in university. Your organizations would die. You can't just eliminate those things because relational cannot process that fast enough. And again, this is sort of what most people think about with the traditional warehouse. This is the end of Indiana Jones where they're taking the Ark of the Covenant back into the big old warehouse. We're going to take some data and stick it in there. The other problem with the traditional warehouses is that if you're trying to manage your metadata through the repositories, it's kind of like doing this. I'll give you a very quick example on this. One company that we're working with has taken all of their SAP metadata out of SAP. Now, just some quick numbers. Anybody know approximately how many tables SAP has out of the box? 30,000. About 20,000 natively. After customization, it's usually 30. Their count is 45,000 tables and about 400,000 attributes. And they grabbed all of it, the names. And they threw the names into the repository and they said, now we're going to try and organize it. Anybody see a problem with that? Still in German. Yeah, the key is this is not the environment in the repository that you want to manage it with. You really need to work with it outside the repository so you can use things like SQL Server and other things like that, and then put the components, once you've organized them, back into the repository. So it makes a lot more sense to organize it generally outside, but there's a lot of evolution going on here. And again, I urge you to visit the vendors that are in the break room that we go to next, where all the free booze is, right? And see what's out there. There's some good work that's going on. We've got to get to that stage. Now, generally preaching abstinence is sort of a controversial topic, but what I'm asking you guys to do is hold off on talking to the vendors. That's the abstinence piece. Because if you can get yourselves more informed before you go talking to the vendors, you'll be in better shape. So try to stick away from it, because what happens is, after you put in your repository, you find out all sorts of other things about how it works. Here's an example that I like to use a lot. This is there we go. Actually, somebody tell me what that is. Plane ticket. Not really a ticket, Sue, but it's the output from the Sabre system that shows the equivalent of your plane ticket. Okay? Sue just saw through that step. It's what? That's one ticket. Now this is what happens when you go to Charles de Gaulle Airport, true story, and because you come through French security, you can't get to your connection in time, even though you've got 3 hours to do it. So they sew up and say, you're not here in time, even though it's 90 minutes in front of your flight, you must go see my colleague. Okay? And they print this piece of paper out and they say, take this to my colleague. And you're, okay, great. So you go take it to your colleague. And you're thinking you're going to manage this metadata because you've already done this kind of analysis. There's one little piece of metadata on here, though, that's critically important. Anybody know what that is? It's not quite initials, but there is something written in the upper corner there, right? This is the French for make sure you guys lose this guy's luggage. It's an absolutely unknown, undocumented metadata requirement that you never had before. Now, literally, the airlines are, in fact, looking at this. Anybody fly up here on US Air? What was the fun part about flying up on US Air this week? They finally put the Air West and US Air systems together, and they forgot to train the people that this was going to happen. So as you were checking in, they're going, I got this screen that's got this, and this screen that's got this. In fact, if you're flying through Phoenix, they actually have a line that says if you're going to the left coast, go this way, and the right coast, go this way, which most people aren't prepared to look for, and they end up waiting in the wrong line for hours, which of course is why they want to merge the systems. Well, all of these undocumented things are going to come back and get you. It's just a very big challenge. And how, by the way, does your repository take care of this? Right? Oh yeah, we didn't think about that before we built it. Now we're in the same situation we were at everything else. So the realities of the situation are you can't solve all the problems, but boiling the ocean becomes obvious when you're trying to do that. You want to develop the correct solution, but you can't develop the correct solution because change, of course, is constant, and you've got to plan the evolution in there. You definitely can't understand your entire meta model, but you over time will grow and do that. Does anybody feel like they understand most of their metadata? And I want to know how many years it took you to do it. Okay, how many years, Sue?
Sort of like from the time I was born, I'm still going.
Maybe a different kind of metadata. How about the business metadata?
About the same.
About the same, okay. Not a problem. Again, you will gradually comprehend this. If you could somehow package that and go back before, it reminds me of the Dilbert, which the pointy-haired boss is saying to Alice, who's the smart engineer. Alice, I noticed that when you're problem solving, the thing that you try last is always the one that works. And I want you to improve that.
Is that why I always find my wallet in the last place I look?
Yeah. Got a PHP at home too?
Yeah.
Well, again, the requirements are going to be understood over time. So take a year to do your process. Go through it. One more piece, if you ever need any justification when your boss says, why is this going to take so long? Some of you have been filling out your own tax forms still. And in the IRS, up to this point, if you were filling out your domestic tax forms for U.S., you had to adopt 5 different definitions of the term child. Now, the IRS is quite proud of the fact, this is Pam Olson, who's the IRS commissioner in charge of the project, and she was quite proud of the fact that it took only 13 years to resolve the 5 definitions of child. Now, I don't have kids. Does anybody have kids? And have they done this, or is this something that's coming? Don't know. Even that's a little scary, isn't it? You would think if they made a fundamental change like that, you know, people like David that's got at least 2 at home, right, would get this. No, we're talking about semantics here. We're talking about... Okay, so they probably haven't implemented it yet. So I think when she talked about this, it was moving through as legislation. Okay? 5 different definitions of child in one 1040 form. That's hard on people. But solving the problem was even harder. So again, if it takes a while, you know, it's going to take a while. You're not going to get it done quickly as you go through the process. We use, in this context, something called the CMM SEI Capability Maturity Model, of which you all have an article that was co-authored by David Allen and myself in your packet. So I urge you to look through there. It's not just vendor stuff. This is a scientifically refereed article that we're getting a preprint about. And what this does is talks about the maturity levels that organizations have. And most of you are kind of familiar with this. I'm going to pretend that Mike Gorman is the lowly database administrator for the organization here. And what Mike does is that he develops databases for the organization. Okay? Now, what we have is an organization that has a practice that says, when I need to develop a database, I come line up outside of Mike Gorman's door. Right? He's just got a line of people waiting to develop databases outside of his door. At that point, the organization is level 2. Everybody gets level 1 to start out with. It's kind of like showing up and writing your name on the exam and you get a D. Okay? So we get to level 2. It's repeatable because the processes go to Gorman. Right? You get to level 3, and now Gorman has been told, write down what it is you do to develop databases. So he writes a book. Wrong book. Where's your good book?
Oh, I left it upstairs.
Oh, okay. Well, he's got his books out there. So he writes down a book. Now he's got a defined process. Okay? Or it could be a procedure. It could be a web page, frequently asked questions, something that gives you the goal of getting in there and doing that. And now Glenn, who's his manager, comes along and says, okay, Mike's written a book, and he's going to hand the book to Sue and say, now you develop the databases according to this process. Okay? And Glenn's going to manage that to make sure that you're actually following that. Now you're at a level 4. Okay? And if we put a feedback loop on top of that, optimizing, now we have reached a level 5. Everybody okay with those levels? All right. So as you're working your way through the various projects and things, you can sort of give an assessment and an idea and a guess as to where you are. This is an overall process model of what we talk about in data management. I'm not going to spend time on it other than to say there's some coordination activities, some integration activities. You've heard about stewardship mentioned here tons and tons of time. The governance component works in this side, giving the direction. Over here on the implementation side, then we develop data and actually put data support operations in place so that you don't lose your backups and all the rest of that sort of thing. Again, just sort of a process idea on that. And then one last one on this, which is that when you know where you are, now what we've got here is an assessment that's been done in effect. And the blue, in this case, was an airline, and the red were the other airlines. So this airline can now say, gosh, we're behind the other airlines, okay? Or we're close to where the other airlines are. The white lines are everybody we've surveyed, so we can also say the airline industry in that area is less well mature than everybody else. Everybody with me on that? Again, the processes that you need to be able to go through this then are very clear. All right? In order to manage metadata, however, you don't need a repository, you need a repository functionality. You need to be able to go in and do things as if. So the repository doesn't have to be an integrated solution. It has to be an easily integratable solution. You all have lots of background in architecture. You're able to look at things and say, okay, if I had my repository, this is what I'd like to do. Now you can start building out the pieces. That, by the way, is not what we did at the Defense Department. We just shoveled data names into the repositories and software programs into the repositories. I spent most of the summer of 1993 in the basement of the Pentagon, literally shoving data entities into the repository. The repository functionality does not equal a repository, but it's got to evolve. Multiple repositories are not necessarily bad if you architect them correctly. You can get there. And the minimum functionality, of course, is what you're really trying to do. So in order to do this exercise, and we developed this because we saw so many organizations that would do one of two things. They'd go out, they'd read Gartner, Gartner would say buy this, they'd buy this, and now they have $500,000 that they've invested already. Now what do? Well, now they start to work with it. By the way, one of the key tests for your repository vendor should be, okay, I have some metadata, how quickly can you get it into the repository solution that you're proposing? And what is, of course, the most popular place that most people keep their metadata in? Excel spreadsheets. So ask your potential repository vendor to take Excel spreadsheet and put it in there. And if they go, oh, okay, shoot, and it's in, that's a pretty good result. Anybody had that happen? You mean they come to you with a repository product and it can't take a spreadsheet? I'm not shocked. It's amazing, isn't it? You'd think that if you really wanted to impress somebody like Glenn, who's a potential customer, you'd say, yes, our repository product will take, here's a spreadsheet, put it in there, suck it in, and it's in your repository. Disappointing, isn't it? Well, what do we need to do this? The exercise is very straightforward. First thing we need is a decent DBA that is not going to fuss at us for recreating the data model 45 times in a week. That's actually kind of hard to find. Because you know what they say to you, why don't you figure out what it is you want, and then I'll just build it once for you. But of course you can't. How many times did we revise the data model on this one?
Oh, 5, 6, John? At least?
Yeah. We were not up in the 45 category, but we had to go through some revisions.
We probably discussed 10.
Yeah, because we kept, we're going to go this way or that way. Another interesting aspect of the project that we did with Glenn was that he wanted to include corporate terminology, essentially the taxonomy and ontology type information that you'd like to store in there. And that really was an area that we hadn't done quite as much work in, so it was very much a co-development situation.
That was important to me because
I love this story.
if you have to understand a little bit of what I inherited is, you know, we, first of all, I'd say, did not have data management. We had perhaps database management, okay? So MCSE type of database management. So what we did is we did set up basically what was referred to as a data warehouse. Again, this is before my time, but we did ETL, except we kind of left out the T. So we did E&L. And you know, to your point about organizing your garbage, I always tell people in my team, we're not data architects, we're data archaeologists, because what we really do is we live in the dumpster and look at what comes out of all the application systems and make sense of it. Well, so what happened is we consolidated information from the banking systems and the mortgage application systems and the loan application systems and all the various packaged software, and then went about trying to figure out how to integrate them. So if anybody saw Claudia and Colin's presentation on Monday, that's a lot of what they talked about. That was my life story right there on the PowerPoint
Operational
screen.
BI.
Operational BI, and that's what we're trying to accomplish. So what happens is that you consolidate all information, and then somebody opened up the gates and said, come write ad hoc reports. Beautiful thing. Anybody care to guess how many definitions of a checking account we had? You'd think, yeah, you'd think that'd be pretty easy. How about an active checking account? Yep, more than that. So it was important to me that we created a tool that not only inventoried reports and inventoried the database schemas, but that I and eventually could pass on to the business users within our organization a way that they could understand how their business rules that they described impacted the reports and the decisions that they made. And I haven't told you this yet, Peter. I was in an operations review meeting, which is, as a director, one of my privileges is to go to a 4.5-hour meeting once a month, and we go through all the financial results and everything. And since we're a credit union, we used to be seg-based, which means we used to be based on, you work for a certain company or something like that. We're now community-based. So we do a lot of analysis of our customers in terms of whether they're in-market or out-of-market customers. If you're an in-market customer, then you're somebody who is going to go to one of our branches. You're more likely to have a checking account than if you're a retired TWA pilot who lives in Sun City, Arizona. You probably don't have a checking account with us because it's a long way to go to a branch, right? So the point of the in and out of market is there were numerous definitions of that. And I was in an ops meeting in February, and somebody put up a slide and said, well, this is just in-market loans. And the guy who's like the main sales guy, the guy who you would never in the world imagine would get metadata, stood up and said, which definition of in-market are you using? I wanted to cry. I had just, I felt like I'd arrived.
And did we have that one in the repository
And
yet?
it is in the repository,
Okay.
yeah. It was
So
a
you're
beautiful
able to say,
moment.
well, how about this?
But that's what we're trying to get to, in addition to the technical documentation, which is important. So.
The first thing most people want to put in their repository are their data models. Right? We never even talk data models the entire week.
Right.
Not to say that they don't use them, it's just that was not the primary focus of this exercise, which is one of the things that made it so interesting.
Well, when you deal primarily with packaged software solutions, you don't get a lot of input into the data model anyway. So while we're interested in them, a lot of it is reverse engineering.
Although one of the questions we're asking you on the survey is how many organizations are now requiring packaged vendors to provide them with a data model before they make their evaluation decision? And it turns out about a third of the organizations are out there saying, you can hand us a data model or you won't be considered.
Now the next question is, what do you get when you do get that? Do you get a schema, or do you really get a data model?
Correct.
You get a funny picture with different colours and little blots on it.
Right.
And you're expected to make sense of it.
Well, then I'll reject it.
I do.
By definition of a model, it's a picture of the definition and the mapping back to capability.
Yep, all three pieces. A picture by itself is not good enough. Absolutely. Please.
We requested data models from 4 vendors, and I think it's an indication if they don't have a data model, it's a pretty good indication of the quality of the product. And right off the bat, what industry are you in, sir? Healthcare. Okay. Fairly well defined, especially with HIPAA and things like that going on. Anybody here work for a bank? Financial services?
A couple.
How old are your banking systems?
Decades or years?
4 or 40? 4, okay. I mean, in our case, we're using, I don't know, 4th or 5th generation of something that, was a flat file database or flat file system, written probably with Fortran or COBOL or something like that back in the day. So,
They've been ported back and forth. Well, again, that's another talk in there, but yeah, I would urge you guys to start doing that because the more that do it, the more likely you're started on this particular deviation. You need a decent DBA that's going to be able to help you, but more importantly, one who's cooperative enough, who builds and rebuilds and is not going to fuss. The reason you want to do that is because after we finish the week, you're still going to need to rebuild it. And what the DBAs do is they say, okay, they're clearly not going to figure out what they want before they tell me about it, so they build a way of reloading your repository quickly and easily. And they build a nice little set of scripting technologies that they can go, okay, you want to change it again? No problem, here it goes. And they can then tweak the script to put it back out there. Eventually, of course, over time, your model will stabilize, and then you won't need that individual to do that over and over again. But during the initial phase, it's a lot of work and rework, and it's hard to get a DBA to say, yeah, I love rebuilding my database, right? It just goes against everything we've taught them. You need a good interface development specialist. You need to pick a technology that is going to have something on the front of it. Now, one of the ones that we did recently, again, David, I think, was on this one as well. We had an Oracle backend that they wanted to use, and they argued for about a week in advance about whether they're going to use Oracle Forms, the HTML front end for it, or another product that was going to sit up in the front part of this. But it came down to we needed to have somebody that could build that interface. Why did I want somebody to build the interface? It doesn't do any good to shove data into your repository. You need to have something that will come back out. And more importantly, you need it to be friendly enough. Now, the way we use this in the university community is it's got to be simple enough for a full professor to use it and useful enough that they're going to want to learn how. Okay? So it's got to have an accessible interface so that not only Glenn's boss, but the director that you mentioned at that meeting can go out there and say,
Right.
here's two definitions, which one's the right one? One of the main reasons you're starting to put stuff in your repository is so people can look at it and say, that's wrong. When they say that's wrong, why is that a good thing, Sue?
Because then you get to the right eventually.
Yep.
Whereas if there's nothing in there in the first place, then any answer is going to get you there.
Just writing it down and putting it in front of somebody.
And that is a
On the
wonderful leap forward in technology, because as soon as the next argument happens anywhere in the organization, they go back in and say, all right, we wrote down the definition, we researched it, now let's put it out there in the repository. And they've got to have something that they can sit down, type it in, and it gets added. Now, it doesn't necessarily go in. You might want to have a review process. In this Glenn's case, it's got to be where does it fit in the taxonomy that you put together and all the rest of these things.
Right.
Interface is critical. Okay? One of the major repository technologies did not have an HTML interface until just a couple of years ago. So you could shove everything that you wanted to in there, but getting it back out required the same team of programmers that used to go in after your data warehouse. Oh, so you took the data warehouse team and now they're focused on repository technology writing. Boy, that's tough.
And we don't have staff for that.
Again, build, rebuild, and rebuild. You need a decent data modeler, of course, who understands the structural implications. And then it's, of course, critical to have business analyst skills on the process as well. So how do you get started? Well, again, we want to talk with a lot of people. We want to find those power thinkers. They appreciate the approach. They understand the usefulness of it. You want to analyze the spreadsheet-based metadata or whatever form. A lot of you have access, and a lot of you have old or different types of technologies in there. And you want to, of course, find out about the unanswered questions as well. The unanswered questions are the ones about the business. How come we can never get, or if we do it this way, it comes out with these numbers, and if I do it this way, it comes out with these numbers. Why is that? And your archaeological team hasn't yet had a chance to get in there and do that particular process. Then the steps are very simple. Find pain in the organization. Fix it. And then let everybody know that that was a metadata problem and that you solved it by throwing the stuff in the metadata repository. You've heard the selling pitches that everybody else is giving you and all this sort of thing in there. I'm going to stop right here and flip over to an example of this very quickly. This is an Access database that we built for one organization that has something in it called FTI. You know what FTI is, Gene? Financial Transactions International. It's a basic data model for financial institutions that's been used as a baseline data model for years and years for a lot of different organizations. You may not have actually used this one. But, you know, very simply, here is a set of tables that we can take a look at. It pulls up this stuff here. I can then look specifically at the entity, get the definition of the entity, put it back in there. What, of course, is the problem? I get the reports and things that pop out of it. There we go. Oh, that was interesting. Where'd it go? I think it crashed.
Yeah.
Inline.
One of the reasons why you use Microsoft Access.
We didn't build ours in Access, by the way.
I hope not.
Of course, the problem with Access is that you have
Thumbs DB.
thumbnails,
I never know what the hell it is.
thumbnail sketches of the screens.
Oh, of what? The crash?
Screens. Screens, all the images that you've got in your screens.
Oh, okay.
It's how Windows generates the little thumbnail previews.
Oh.
By the way, this is a question here from the guy who sent me an email a couple years back and said, I'm now certified as a XP developer.
Who?
You.
Yeah.
And you had never, yeah, and you had never,
Never said that.
I've got the email from you. And his bottom comment was, and I've never touched the thing in my life. You had only read the books. I'll pull it up for you after this if you want.
XP developer?
XP, yeah. Thanks.
You mean as in the operating system
Yeah.
XP?
Yeah, you were real proud. No, NT. It was longer than that.
NT?
NT, yeah. Well, Michael's getting senile.
It must have been for my son, Michael Ford.
No, it was you. I'll pull it up. You get the picture here. You get the picture here. This is very straightforward in terms of metadata about the application. In this case, that was forming the basis of their processing, very much like Cerner in the healthcare industry forms the basis of much of the processing that goes on in there. So, this is pretty straightforward, and the data model for this is in your notes, so you can look at that data model and actually reconstruct this particular database out of that. It's not ideal. In this case,
Certainly not in English.
it was a release-based piece, so it was a read-only model. There was not updating that went on once they had done the first piece of the release on this.
And if I can, I'll add a comment on the previous demonstration. That was something that we looked at when the first time Peter came out to Kansas City and met with my team and my boss. And I don't mean to pass and make any sort of an assessment on it, but what I saw there was I knew I didn't want.
Right.
Okay, because not because it was in Access, but because I needed something that I could put in front of a sales executive, and they go, "Oh, I get it," and that certainly wasn't going to be it. So we took a little bit different approach. Very quickly, I've already told you a lot about Community America, so we'll just cover this just in a second or two. We have about 127,000 members. We're based in Kansas City, actually, Lenexa, Kansas. We have branches in Kansas City, St. Louis, and Topeka. And I'm not sure where we rank, but we are up in about the top 20 credit unions in the United States in terms of size and assets and that sort of thing. So let's go on, please. In terms of what my goals were as a manager, I wanted to make sure that we were working on metadata and not getting ourselves into a lengthy technical development project. So as I said earlier, I have a software development background, and I had no interest in a week-long ASP.NET development project. Now, we did some ASP.NET development, but that wasn't the focus. The metadata was very much the focus. So I wanted to de-emphasize that development process. I was also very interested in making sure that we educated the folks that were on my team. I said we had database management, not necessarily data management. So a lot of what I asked Peter and his team to do was come in with an eye to get us up to speed on metadata management, but also let us learn. And we needed, again, since we're a small organization, and we don't typically spend a year studying something, we needed to demonstrate value fairly quickly. So with that, again, I think we talked about the fact that the CIO, he already understands metadata. The business, not so much. They understand that there's multiple definitions of an active checking account and that causes problems. They don't care that that's a metadata issue at all. We are very much a Microsoft.NET oriented shop, and we are a SQL Server shop. So we are also looking seriously at Microsoft SharePoint. So I had a sort of an ulterior motive that I was looking for proof of concept for SharePoint. And then we do a lot of work in SQL Server reporting services. Does anybody here use SQL Server reporting services? Okay. I personally think it's a great tool. You can generate output very quickly, and if you have a little bit of a HTML development experience, you can get something that looks pretty nice. So again, my goals there were not necessarily to choose a technology, but rather to emphasize metadata, so to pick a tool set that we were already familiar with and we wouldn't become frustrated.
And you had a great team. I mean, that
We
was
did.
the other part.
We had a really good team. Most of them were there before I got there, so no, I'm just kidding. So what our approach was to take a very narrow slice of data. Obviously, if you've been working with metadata very much, you already know what we learned and anticipated, and actually the Data Blueprint guys counseled us on, which is that metadata is everywhere, and sometimes it's hard to know where to stop and how many layers of abstraction do you really need. So we picked a piece of data which just happens to be deposit information. It's sort of was a hot business topic for us because anybody here is in banking, deposits are the key to profitability, right? Rather than having to borrow that money that you're going to then turn around and loan. So we went out and we asked some of our business users a little bit about what they would like to see. And then we kind of went out and decided to just go after as much as quickly as we could. We knew we were going to learn by doing. We knew we were going to make a lot of mistakes. And we wanted to periodically validate with our business users throughout the week. So we started on Monday with a session where we said, what would you like to see? We came back
Asking the business users in
Yes.
this case. We brought a couple of them in. And
Thank you. Wednesday, we brought them back in and confused the heck out of them. And but by Friday, I think they went, aha. And so that was a good learning experience for us as well because, we realized, I think, on Wednesday that we'd gone maybe one or two layers too far out. So, that was sort of the approach that we followed. this is the team. You might see a couple of familiar faces in here. Peter, of course, there, and myself. And then from the Community America side, most of the DBAs that work for me. One of those guys, the guy in the back row with the glasses, you may have seen running around here this week. I don't see him in the room right now, but he's here at the conference, Mike Woodmeyer. And then we had John Sells from the Data Blueprint team, as well as Bob Stanley from their team. And I'll just tell you a story on the Data Blueprint guys. You know, as somebody who spent 10 years in consulting, you know, I understand billable time as good as anybody. And I think that the first half day we just talked. And so I'll be honest, I was sitting there thinking, the meter's running on John and Bob and they're not doing anything. But let me tell you, when those guys engaged at about noon on day one, after we figured out what we were going to do, it was pretty impressive how fast we went and how much progress we were able to make. So that's what I got out of the way. There you go. So it was fast-paced. We weren't really in a hurry, but we moved fast. I don't know if you can look out the window there. Yeah.
Kansas
we
City.
don't typically get 6 inches of snow in Kansas in November, but the Data Blueprint guys brought it with them, I guess. So,
You had nothing else better to do.
right, exactly, right. Than a metadata project. What else would you do on a snow day?
Right.
It was highly collaborative. We were all, you know, we found a big room where we could all share. An overhead screen like this, of course. And, you know, I think it is fair to say that you guys learned from us at the same time we learned from you, because I think there was some skepticism early on about using reporting services and using SharePoint and some of those other things. And I guess if that would be my contribution to the week, if anything, would be that I kind of dug my heels in on that and said, no, we're going to use these tools because we know how to use them. And I don't want to focus on tools. I want to focus on metadata and process.
We have some criteria for success, including having the technologies well scoped out in advance and things like that. We had not worked with some of the technologies, and Glenn very much wanted to try it and see how it works, so we designed some experiments to see if it would work. We validated the experiments, and then, again, we came away from there going, that was really cool, too. So, as I said, he sort of asked on Thursday, so how's it going? And I said, we're, you know, easily 50% ahead of the last one of these that we did.
Yeah. So it was good. And actually, we learned that, I mean, if we were going to do it again, I don't know that we'd have SharePoint in the picture. But we probably would have had reporting services in the picture. So anyway, and it was fun. We had a lot of fun. We had a good team. And one more click, I think, Peter. Yeah, it was productive. And yep. Now, the other thing you'll see is in that first slide, John back there is scratching his head. And I actually wanted to present these opposite, but Peter, being the good consultant that he is, he changed them around. Because I wanted to show John being, smart and pointing out to Sue there how everything works, and then the second shot show him scratching his head trying to figure it out. But I think you probably did the right thing.
You wanted John to think and then do, right?
There you go. So
that's the way it was, right, John? Yeah.
But I'm here to tell you the pictures were taken in the other order. So anyway, that's okay. Moving right along. It wasn't good weather. That was our November day, and this young man here, we enlisted. It was a snow day. He's the son of our internal audit and compliance director, and he was at work with Mom that day, and so he has an interest in technology, and so we had him harvesting metadata within an hour.
Not a bad person to have on your side, too, the internal audit and compliance director. So.
Exactly. So actually, he was downloading spreadsheets and helping us. He was downloading them from one place and uploading them into SharePoint. That's what he was doing. So what did we do for a technology stack? Well, going back through again, we had Windows Server 2003, of course, and SQL Server 2005. Again, technologies we're well familiar with, reporting services, and some ASP.NET. You can't really update data very well with reporting services. Actually, you can. If you want to know how, see me and I'll tell you after the presentation. Microsoft doesn't want you to know about that. The ASP.NET was primarily how we did our input. And the retrieval, though, was all done with reporting services. And then SharePoint was sort of the shell that we built everything in. So it gave us a nice collaboration platform, a place that we could upload documents, spreadsheets, those sort of things.
By the end of the week, we were able to go from a terminology, a glossary entry, in a hierarchy of the business, and I've never seen this before, jump all the way down to launching some of the reports that those terms built. Yeah. That's okay. No question of the utility of that type of a piece. We'll talk a little bit about that as well.
So what were our outcomes? We did a lot of learning. I think everyone on the team learned a lot. Again, going back to the fact that we had a room full of DBAs who really weren't data managers per se at the time. We figured out that there's metadata all over the place, and sometimes you just have to turn off your PC and go home because you can't get it all that day. I think another click here. Our technical staff, our DBAs, now get it. Now, not all of them are uniformly thrilled about having a metadata project going on, but they understand what it is and why it's important. And just that whole concept of the multiple definitions and how business rules relate to concepts and relate to reports and relate right down to the columns in the database itself.
Well, again, it's all integrated. So.
Yeah. The business absolutely has seen the value. They want more. I actually pulled the repository up in a meeting a week or two after you guys were gone to discuss a definition of one of the call center metrics. If anybody here deals with call center data, you know what occupancy is or utilization, and we were discussing the definition of what types of agent time were included and what types were excluded. And if we have time, we'll show that. We were a little intimidated, not so much by the process that we did with these guys, but more just of the daunting nature of the task, because once these guys packed up and left town, now we didn't have any excuses. We had a place to put it. But then, you got to go find it all and catalog it and get it right. And I'd say that intimidation also speaks to you don't know where to stop. Every definition that you create begets 2 more definitions that you need to create. And then, of course, we have a completed prototype, which was a key success factor for me.
As they look at repository technology, they have something they can play with as opposed to something they can think about.
Yeah.
So now they can study if they choose to, but they can also say, how would that work if I bring it in here and do it in that particular context?
And I've actually had people request, hey, can I get at the repository because I want to go put this in or I want to go look this up. What I am fond of, I am a huge Google fan, which may seem strange because I'm also a big Microsoft SQL Server fan, but I am a huge fan of Google. I love the fact that I can type in a phone number and get a name, or I can type in a name and get a phone number, or I can type in an address and get a map. I guess maybe I'm just not very bright, but I just like that one box. You just put everything in that box and push the button, and magic happens, right? And as a business user, I believe that's what my business users want. They want something that's as brain dead simple as using Google. And so that was the model that we initially went after. So what you see on the screen is actually a reporting services report in the SharePoint shell. And in that search box, you can type in the name of a concept like occupancy for the call center, or agent, or deposit, and you can get back lists of things. And the beauty of what the Data Blueprint guys brought to the table for us was this idea of really getting things fairly primitive to the idea of the concept, rather than going after schemas. And we've got schemas and tables and all that in there. But this idea of a concept and how it has relationships to other concepts, and those relationships could be a broader term or a narrower term or a term that is a substitution for some other term. All of those types of things that we wouldn't have thought of on our own. So it's really, really pretty cool. And you can then filter some additional ways.
Right, yeah, actually, we should drop down boxes and things like that.
We actually elected, I think wisely, not to do a demo because I've never done a successful demo in my entire career.
And he has to go in through a secure VPN.
There's like a
which is
dark
real
angel
slow.
that follows you around if you do demos, I think. So, but you can filter, and we added a lot of other capabilities here. It's pretty slick. So what do we have to do next? Well, we have to go find our metadata, and we have to go after getting it in there, and that's a project. And we have to get that funded and staffed and everything else.
But now they have an idea of what that is like, as opposed to being told, well, it's 2 FTEs. What does that mean? What are those types of FTEs and things like that? You're also much closer to being ready for that process because you've done it.
Mm-hmm.
It's not all of it, it's not done, but they've been doing it. So in a week's worth of time, they've now got something that as they're studying, they can also play with. How would that work if we put this in here? Well, that can be your next priority area that you're focusing on.
I I think another piece is obviously we have to sell it. You know, our CIO gets it, but if the choice is do this or implement dual authentication on our website, we're probably going to do dual authentication on our website. So like any other project, we have to do it. But I really believe that we've got something now that we can point to that people will understand the value of, as opposed to, well, we need a metadata tool, which is a little harder to defend.
The other thing is they're starting to work towards their common metadata model. The model now is more stable than it was when we started, and they've got a good idea where they can exercise that, even theoretically, right? And this happens on a fairly regular basis. A new concept, yeah, I can see how that would fit into there, or I can't see how that would fit in there, and that's something that we're going to have to deal with, which is a question then for a vendor if they come at you. And then, of course, the last part was existing templates and standards and things like that getting in there. So we're actually at the hour. Again, the point here from Einstein is he didn't create the problems, but he's been asked to solve them. Okay?
I created some of them, but that was when I was a consultant, so it didn't matter.
That's a good idea. Go in and mess something up and then get hired. Okay. All right. So you get what I mean by the traditional approach? Study, buy, don't do it, right? Enhance that year of study. Continue with your as-is process of studying, but supplement that with a small exercise that gets you this ability to go out and do things. Build it quickly. Use it for a year. Use it for a couple years. You may not ever go into the repository technology. Again, our surveys show that about a quarter of you are never going to buy a repository and will be just fine. Okay? Now you also know what you need to do from an organizational perspective, from a staff development perspective. You know where you're going on that, and that'll give you a whole lot more of ammunition as you get ready to go about the process. So, quick time for any quick questions, and I think after that it's free drinks off in the vendor booths, right?
I think so. If anybody does want to see the repository in action, get with me either after this session. I can show it to you offline. Be happy to do that.
Clear as mud, right?
Sir?
Do you think you'll continue with the SQL Server platform and just come back and maybe redo it on that based on what you know?
Based on what I know today, I'd say yes, we will.
I mean, why should you go out and buy a tool now? All this functionality, customize the reporting.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not sure that we will buy a tool now. I don't know that we will end up using exactly what we've got now, and that's something that Peter and I have been discussing, is we may need to do another round to refine the tool.
I think you get the funding to rewrite it, though.
Yes, I absolutely do. The moment that my director of indirect lending, this is a guy who's responsible for selling car loans to car dealers, stood up in a meeting and said, which definition of in-market are you using? I knew we would get the funding. Because that's a direct consequence of this project, and just bringing daylight to that whole issue. And if it's too bad we didn't do a demo, because one of the things that we did with the help of the Data Blueprint guys is this idea of a concept is beautiful, because it can be a business rule, it can be an English statement that says it's this, it can also be a block of SQL code. Absolutely. And it can be here's the formula for how you calculate it.
John, you pulled that from library science, right?
So,
Yeah.
so if you would hit the definitions button, you could have showed us the definition of this term that they
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And not only that, but how it relates to other terms and whether they are above or below them on the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Very graphically oriented, so everybody looks at it and goes, oh.
We actually had a definition of in-market that was, and feel free to go, I don't think but we actually had a definition of in and out of market. It's actually based on MSA code or certain counties. We actually had one that was presented as a definition of in and out of market that is anybody who's within 60 miles of Kansas City. Try and implement that one. I told our CEO, I said, I'm going to put in a request for 60 miles of string and some spray paint because I don't know how else to figure out who's in market and who's out.